before sunrise. I'm on Brighton seafront. It's autumn 2020. Sunrise is clashing with low tide. I've come down to Brighton seafront to photograph the West Pier at low tide. I'm going to be testing out some filters today as well, so that's looking good. But whilst I'm here, I don't think I've ever made a video specifically about photographing Brighton seafront, so I normally just have this as a backdrop. If you watch a lot of my videos, then you'll recognise the bandstand. I like to photograph this and I like to use this in my videos, but there's so much clustered here on Brighton seafront in such a short space. You'll probably see why I gravitate towards this area, because there's a lot happening for a landscape photographer. So I'll give you a quick tour. This is the bandstand. I've photographed this a bunch. If you're looking for a really nice shot, photograph people dancing against the sunset. They'll be in silhouette. The colours of the sky will be amazing. Nice and easy shot. But if you're photographing the bandstand, you probably want some people in the shot, otherwise it just looks a bit static. Let's head along the beach and I'll show you what else there is to photograph. About 200 metres east along the beach, you'll come across this upside down house. It's a temporary installation. I'm not entirely sure how long it's going to be here for, but obviously another photographic subject, and if you come here at the right time then you can go inside it and everything's upside down. All the furniture's stuck to the ceiling. And then if I spin the camera around, you've got behind here British Airways i360, which if you don't know what that is, I'll put a card at the top. I was their official photographer last year. I've got a ton of photographs of that thing. And then if you look south towards the sea, there she is, there is the West Pier. Alright, so now that I'm actually on the beach, you can see the West Pier's behind me. Now let me give you a few tips for if you're photographing the West Pier. You can see here there are some columns directly in front of the West Pier. These used to support the bridge that got you from the promenade, or from the road area, onto the pier itself. That's what these columns are. The rest of them fell into the sea, and they've actually been salvaged for an art installation which is across there. I'll overlay some drone footage of what that looks like, but essentially it's a spiral and they've just created bits of fallen apart West Pier to make some art, which is cool. And then if you head maybe half a mile that way, maybe a bit more, you've got the Palace Pier, which is the functioning pier, which has got the chips and the candy floss and all the rides and everything. And I photographed that not too long ago at low tide. I'll put a link to that video here. So for me personally, I think there are two circumstances when you might photograph the West Pier: high tide and low tide. This morning, sunrise is clashing with low tide, and therefore you can get in front of these columns. I personally think that these columns get in the way of the West Pier. If you were to come here at high tide, then the water is amongst the columns here, and it doesn't give you many composition options. But personally, I don't ever photograph it from this perspective, because I think that these columns get in the way. So at low tide, like today, we're going to go right in front of the columns, and you'll see I'm wearing wellies because I know I'm going to have to get into the water a little bit. So that's the plan. When you come here at high tide, I normally come to the sides of the columns and then I shoot the West Pier with the columns offset. Therefore the columns are never actually crossing over the West Pier. And one of my pet peeves about this is that the West Pier and the i360 do not perfectly align. If I turn around here, you'll see that I'm not actually in the middle of the i360. So you can never actually line up the columns with the i360 properly. And you've got some photogenic boats and just bits of stuff. You've got the donut, which is, I think it's made of copper. Probably just another art installation, but that's also photogenic. I've photographed that over the years. Let's get down onto the seafront and photograph the West Pier. If you were to come here at high tide, then previous shots I've done is something similar to that. You've got loads of columns here, so you just want to make sure that you've got a nice number of columns and they're not too distracting. But I think I've gone for a composition with 6 columns before. You can play about with it, but at high tide the water's going to be up here, so it will be a much more simple looking image. But a few other instances where you might photograph the West Pier, obviously I've been down here when there's been lightning. If you've got some interesting skies, if you come here in winter, then the sun is going to be rising behind the pier over there, and the sun will be setting in the sea, so you can actually get the sun setting behind the West Pier. You can photograph the West Pier from the top of the i360 all the way up there, but personally I'll show you an image of what that looks like. I don't think it's particularly pretty. Photographing the West Pier, you've just got to find something unique. This has been photographed by everybody. So if you want a unique shot, you've got to find some interesting foreground, something different to differentiate your images. I don't know whether I've successfully done that, but other than my kids, this is probably the one subject that I've photographed the most out of everything landscape photography. Look how calm that water is. Beautiful. So what you might be able to see on camera is that these columns aren't actually in the middle of the West Pier either. If you want a truly symmetrical shot, you have to come to here. And as you can see, I'm not in the middle of the columns. If you come back here, you will get a nice looking shot. These are very contrasty. These columns are very contrasty, so I tend not to include them in the shot. But you could probably bracket the image and you'd get one. I just think that they are a bit too distracting in the composition. So if you're coming here and you want a really clean image, what you need to do is you need to claim the middle spot, okay? There is only one middle spot, and it's right here by my wellies. Come at low tide, get in front of the columns and set up your camera right in the middle, and we're going to put some filters on and take some shots. Okay, so I've almost got my camera set up over there. Now, a company called H&Y who make filters, and I have to say they're innovating in the world of filters as well. If you follow my channel, you might know that I did a review of something called the Revo ring for H&Y on Gordon Lang's channel. I'll put a link up in the video here. It was a Kickstarter campaign, and essentially it was a variable size filter holder system. So this company have got in touch and they said, Ben, how would you like to try out our magnetic filter system? And I said, yeah, sure, why not? It sounds like fun. They have sent me a handful of filters and the filter holder, and that equates to £1,000. So this is really high-end filter system. So what I'm going to do today, I've got my sharpest lens, or I've got the lens which I consider to be my sharpest. I've got the 24mm tilt shift. I'm going to take some shots without filters, and then I'm going to add the filters. I'm going to compare them to what I'm currently using, which is a Lee system. I've also got some high-tech filters. It's not just about optical quality. These H&Y filters are made from Gorilla Glass, which is the same glass that your iPhone screen is made of. So these things are pretty tough. They are built to last. Let's see what the fuss is about. Alright, so first off, I'm going to take a photograph without any filters. Right, let's put the H&Y filter system on. So like I was saying earlier, this filter system, and I won't keep on going on about the price, but I'm just trying to give you an idea. This is an expensive piece of kit. It is high-end, so that's why I'm testing it out, because I want to see if it lives up to the expectations of the price tag. This threw me at first, but you've got to just loosen the two bits on the back, slide it over the top, tighten these, and then it's on. This is where the fun starts, okay? Because everything from this point on is magnetic. So you've got a little finger area for you to hold it by, and then it just holds on by a magnet, and then it's got a fastening bit on the other side. So the first image I've taken with the H&Y is 2808, and I have to say that is looking pretty sharp. That's a 10-stop ND filter. The next image I'm taking is using a Freewell 10-stop magnetic filter. I did shoot the last one at f8, so I'm going to keep that consistent. So this one again is a 60-second exposure, f8. I might have to adapt the length of the exposure because the sun is coming up now. And then after this, I'm going to put my Lee filter holder system on, and then I'm going to use the Hitech 10-stop and see how that compares, because that's my existing landscape photography setup right there. So when it comes to filter holders, this is probably what you're used to using and seeing. You've got something that attaches to the front of the lens, and then you've got either a metal or plastic mount which takes filters that you slot in. And then I've got the optional polarizing attachment that goes on the front here. So this is how the composition's looking right now. Glorious sunrise. Whoa! Oh, it's looking good. I'm not sure how much longer I've got looking at those clouds, but I'm going to crack on and try and get some shots. I'll still take photographs once the clouds have come over, but there's no consistency with exposure, etc. So I'd rather that didn't happen, but I'm not in control of the weather. Right, something funny is going on here. On front of the camera I've got a 10-stop filter and a 2-stop soft edge grad from H&Y, and this is f11 91 seconds ISO 100. Now if I go back one, you'll see 93 seconds f11 ISO 100. That is the Hitech 10-stop filter with a Lee 2-stop soft edge grad. So either, I suspect that my Hitech filter is not actually a 10-stop. Considering the quality of this H&Y filter and how high-end this is, I suspect that this is correct and my Hitech one is off. So this is actually my first time out using these filters, and first thing I'm interested in is how good is it optically, and that's why I'm pitting it up against my existing filters, because if I'm ever looking to upgrade my gear, I want to know how it compares to what I'm using right now. So that's the first step for me. I'm going to compare it to my Lee filters, my Hitech. Other than that, there's the user experience as well, because having magnetic filters, I've been using magnetic filters for say 6 months since Freewell sent me theirs, and I have to say it's quite fun, and there's obviously a time saving to it. But when it comes to landscape photography, like I said in that Freewell video, it's ironic that I will save 15 or 30 seconds putting on a filter, and then I'll sit still for a few minutes doing long exposure photography. So there is an irony in that, but I think that there are other benefits in magnetic filters, because I've only just started using this, but I'd like to think there's less chance of you dropping it because they're all magnetic. I don't know, time will tell, but I think the theory is you're less likely to drop this because they all stick to one another. I think I'm going to have to come back tomorrow and shoot some more landscapes, because that was a very small window of opportunity to take photographs. So it's the next day, I've come back, it's before sunrise, the weather is not looking too promising, but it's even lower low tide today. So if you come down to Brighton at low tide, the Pebble Beach is actually man-made. So you'll actually reveal the sand when you come here at low tide. And right now, I'm too deep in the water, but I am actually level with some of the original structure of the West Pier. So if you come here at proper low tide, you can walk out actually pretty close to the West Pier. Most of the time you're way back there on the beach looking at the West Pier, but here I am all the way out in the water. Something I didn't mention yesterday is if you're local, people in Brighton, especially the photography groups, are totally sick of seeing photographs of the West Pier. But I get location envy when I'm online looking at other people's photographs. So if you've never visited this and you look at a really good long exposure of the West Pier, you'll think, I've got to go there. It's one of those places where you've got to see, it's a classic landscape photography location. Locals are sick of it, but if you're watching this video and you've never been to Brighton, you'll look at these photographs and you'll think, wow, got to go there. And that's the whole point of making these YouTube videos. I like to go to locations, scout them out, but I've kind of overlooked this because I come here so often and it's on my doorstep. I've got that the grass is always greener on the other side. Now, when I first got to Brighton in around 2002, there was a lot more to the pier than what you can see today. You can see the massive gap between the end of the pier and then the columns, which is the bridge over here. Now, when I first arrived in Brighton, there was a lot more to it. There was the main dome that was just collapsed on the beach here. Unfortunately, I wasn't very good at photography then, so I didn't get any good shots. But one of the critical things for me was that the pier that remains used to be a bit more symmetrical. You can see the gap in it here. I have got some photographs of the complete West Pier as such, but now that that section's dropped, it's just a little bit annoying. Whilst I see the birds across here, we're coming up to Starling season now, and that is another really popular time to come and photograph the West Pier. Get some shots of the West Pier with the starlings swarming around. Perfect. Just looking for interesting foreground details that lead you into the West Pier. As you come over here, it's stuff like this that will work well in long exposure. So you've got these jagged sand formations which lead you into the image. So I'm going to set my camera up down here and take that shot. This was the last photograph I took that day. The weather conditions continued to get worse, so I packed up my things, travelled home so that I could take a look at the images that I've taken from yesterday and today. As soon as I got back to the office, I uploaded the photographs into Lightroom. I didn't change any of the settings. I simply imported them to Lightroom, then I exported them straight into Photoshop. As you can see here, I've got all 4 layers, which I'll run you through in a second, and I've then gone into edit, auto align layers so that I can keep things as consistent as possible. This Photoshop file has got the original photograph with no filters. I turned this one on, and this is the H&Y 10 stop filter, which is the first time I was ever using it. The next one was the Freewell 10 stop, and then finally I've got the Hitech 10 stop. You can see slight variations between them, especially the colour cast. The original seems to be closest to the H&Y. You can see very little difference in colour. Then we go to the Freewell. Slightly warmer tone you can see on the horizon. See on the horizon here? And then the reflection in the water with the Freewell seems to be a bit warmer. It's not distasteful, but you can just see that there is a slight difference. And then finally the Hitech filter, which has got the most obvious colour cast. This is the filter that I use most. Granted, I convert most of my photographs to black and white anyway, but this is my filter that I use the most, so that's interesting to put them next to the Freewell and the H&Y. Let's take a closer look just to see what we're looking at in terms of quality. Alright, so I'll keep it here so that you can see there's lots of fine detail in the cables. Let me switch everything off. You can see it's slightly moving around, but don't worry about that. We're just looking at the overall contrast and details. So this is the photograph with no filters. The next one, H&Y. Other than the water smoothing out, keep your eye on the West Pier. I know it's moving around a little bit, but keep an eye on the West Pier. There's literally no difference at all. That 10 stop filter has not changed any of the sharpness to do with the West Pier. Next one, Freewell. Freewell looks a bit contrast here. Look at the difference between the sky and this here. It's not distasteful. You can see that there is a bit more of a difference there. It's created more contrast. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. And then finally we'll have a look at the Hitech. That too has created a smidge more contrast, but if you were to step back, that's at 100% on a 30 megapixel photograph. If you zoom out to something more like this, all 3 of these filters produce great results. I'm not unhappy with any of them. If you're pixel peeping, the H&Y seems to just be almost without filter, apart from obviously the long exposure. In terms of clarity, sharpness and detail, the H&Y seems to be winning that competition, and it seems to be the most neutral. Now you can easily fix that in Lightroom afterwards, but that's not what we're doing here. We're trying to compare the filters straight out of camera. Right, now I've put them all side by side so that you can see the difference all in one go. To the left I've got no filter at all, and coincidentally I've put these in the order of what I think is the highest quality. So you've got the H&Y. As I said earlier, the detail in the West Pier doesn't seem to be any different from the original without a filter. So I'd say the winner of this competition is going to be the H&Y. Next up is my Freewell filter. That is also seems to be very crisp looking image, but it does add more contrast, which might be a good thing, but I would prefer to add the contrast myself in post. You can also see that the Freewell is starting to add a bit of colour cast to the image. And then in last place is my Hitech. The details on the West Pier on the Hitech just seem to be a bit flat, plus it's got the greatest colour cast, making the sea look blue, which is obviously more desirable than the brown and the green that we're used to seeing, but in terms of accuracy the Hitech is way off. Finally, to round this comparison test off, I took some photographs with the 10-stop long exposure filters and some grads. So I've got two shots here. I've got the H&Y 10-stop with the 2-stop soft grad, and I've also got the Hitech 10-stop with a Lee filter 2-stop soft grad. Okay, so these are comparable. 10 stops plus a 2-stop grad on both of them. So as I switch one of these on and off, the biggest difference is the colour cast you're seeing. But the layer on top is the Hitech, so let's zoom in a little bit. So that is at 50%. Let's go in a bit more. Let's go to 100%. So the layer on top is the Hitech with the Lee grads. So I'll switch that off. I think that the H&Y is just getting a bit more of a crisp image. It's really close though. I'm proud that my Hitech filters and my very well used Lee grads are still doing such a good job, and I'm comparing it to an H&Y filter which is high-end Gorilla Glass, and I've taken it straight out of the box. It's never been used before. Once again, I've put the two images side by side and it becomes obvious the colour cast that you're getting from the Hitech. Now in terms of detail, I've already discussed that. I think they're quite closely matched, but the H&Y is definitely winning if you're looking for accurate colour straight out of camera, whereas the Hitech has got different ideas. It wants to make everything blue. A blue sky, that's perfectly acceptable. However, the sea in Brighton is not that blue. So it's another win for the H&Y. I'm going to leave you now with my favourite photographs from the last 10 years of shooting this iconic landmark. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and I'll see you in the next video.